Hello everyone. This video is a follow-up to the shloka number 67, and this is a story related to the nama varṇāśrama vidhāyinī. Varna is a fourfold classification of the society that is based on the occupations, and in olden days Varna was a self-selection. So somebody based on their gunam, their attitude, their aptitude could choose to be in a certain Varna. And this is a story that kind of explores that concept. So let's take a look at the story. Once upon a time, there was a king called King Gadi. King Gadi had a daughter called Satyavati. Satyavati grew up to be a very beautiful girl and she was in the marriageable age. At that time, a sage called Sage Richika came to King's palace. And as it is the norm, the king warmly welcomed the sage and he made sure that the sage was comfortable and all the arrangements were made so he can do his puja and all the spiritual work. And Satyavati was supposed to oversee all these arrangements. And the sage was really impressed with how Satyavati assisted him and he wanted to marry her. So the sage went to the king and said that he wants to marry his daughter. But King Gadi was not very keen on this idea. For one reason, the sage was much older than Satyavati. Secondly, Satyavati grew up as a princess, and if she becomes a wife of a sage, then she has to lead a very simple life, and he thought it might be hard on his daughter. But the king could not directly refuse the sage. He was a bit worried that he could be cursed. So the king made a condition. He said, Sage Richika, if you bring me 1,000 horses that have a white body and a black ear, then I will give you my daughter in marriage. So Sage Richika accepted that condition, and so he went and did a penance, and Varuna came and gave him 1,000 such horses. So Sage Richika was able to give this to King Gadi, and because the king had given his word, now he got his daughter married to the sage. And Satyavati and Sage Richika led a very happy life. And as time passed, Satyavati really loved her husband dearly. And it was her deepest desire to have a son exactly like him. And one day, Sage looked at Satyavati and he said, I feel like you have some deep desire that you want to tell me. Is there anything you want to tell me? Satyavati immediately felt shy and she didn't say anything. She said, I'll tell you tomorrow. And that day she went to talk to her mother, and she told her mother that she is going to ask Sage Richika for a son who's exactly like him. At that time, her mother also told her that she always wished to have a son because as a queen, she's supposed to produce the heir to the throne. And so she said, because your sage, your husband is a great sage, if there is some puja he can do and create, help me have a son, that help me and King Gadi have a son, that will be great. So Satyavati next day went to her husband and she said, I have two wishes. One, I want to have a son exactly like you. And second thing, my mother is also longing for a heir to the throne. So is there something we can do so that they can also have a baby? So she wanted a son and a brother. So Sage Richika completely understood it and he said, don't worry, I'll do a puja and then I'll provide you a potion that will help you have the son. So Sage Richika went and did all the rituals and he created two potions. One potion he gave to Satyavati and he said, this is for you, you should drink this, and after you drink this, you have to go 3 rounds around the Vilva tree. And then he gave another potion, a rice pudding, and he said, this is for your mother, this will help her have the son that she wants, and after she drinks this, she has to go 3 rounds around the peepal tree. It's called Arasamaram. And once you both do this, you will both have the sons you desire. So Satyavati went with the two potions to her mother and she gave the potion that was intended for her mother. And she said, after you drink this, you have to go 3 rounds around the peepal tree. And Satyavati's mother said, all men will want to make sure that their son is the best, and they won't care so much about their brother-in-law. So, if your husband prepared these two portions, he would have definitely made sure that your portion is the best. And she said, you know that the son I will have will become the future king, and therefore it is important that he has all the best qualities. So, why don't we both switch the portions, so that way the person, the baby with the best qualities will be born as the future king. Will you not do this for me? So, Satyavati immediately agreed. She said, yeah, as a future king, he has to have all the best qualities. So, the women both switched their portions. Similarly, the trees also, they changed. So, time passed and both women were pregnant now. And after a few months, sage Richika saw that the aura of Satyavati was changed. And so immediately he knew something was wrong. So he called Satyavati and said, did you drink the potion that I gave you? Did something happen when you tried to drink it? And then Satyavati told him what happened and how she thought, the baby with the best qualities should be born for her mother. So they switched it. At that time, sage Richika told him, oh no, I did not even differentiate it like that. You said you wanted a son with the qualities like me, a sage. So I created a potion that will give you a son with Brahmanical qualities. And your mom needed a future king. So I created a potion that would give her a Kshatriya qualities, a son with Kshatriya qualities. By switching this, now you're going to get a son with Kshatriya qualities and she's going to get a son with the Brahmanical qualities. So, Satyavati was thoroughly dejected. Her desire was to have someone just like her husband. So, she pleaded with her husband, and so sage Richika was able to change that, and he said, the son you have will be a Brahmanical quality, but his descendant will be a Kshatriya quality. So, Satyavati gave birth to sage Jamadagni, and his son is Parashurama, who had warrior like qualities. And Satyavati's mom, the queen, gave birth to a son who was called as Kaushika. And after King Gadi, Kaushika became a king, and Kaushika was a very good king. He took good care of his subjects, and he made sure that everybody had everything that they needed and people lived very happily under his rule. Once, in order to defend his country, he had to go fight a battle, and he went with a huge army, and they were successful in that battle. And King Kaushika, along with his army, was returning back. And since they had fought a long battle, they were a little bit tired. And on the way, they came upon sage Vasishta's ashramam, and so they wanted to rest there for a while. And sage Vasishta's ashramam was in the midst of a dense forest. It had all this greenery. There is beautiful lotus pond. There is a lot of water. There are all these birds chirping and singing. So it was like a serene place. At the same time, it had lots of sages who were tapasvis. And because of their power, it also had a divine quality. So it seemed like the ideal place to rest. So the king, along with his army, went to the ashramam. And sage Vasishta saw King Kaushika. He welcomed him warmly. They were all given something to drink, and so they were all able to rest for a while. After a while, King Kaushika thought they should get going. So he told the sage, okay, I'm going to start now. Thank you for your hospitality. Then sage Vasishta told King Kaushika that they should eat and then leave. And King Kaushika did not want to impose upon the sage. The sage lives in an ashram, and maybe there are only 200 people there. But he has a huge army. Feeding such a big army means they could deplete all their provisions, and he didn't want to leave all these Brahmins hungry because of his army. So he said, no, not required. You've been very nice. You've allowed us some place to rest. That is enough. I'll get going. We'll figure out our food. But sage Vasishta said, no, I insist you should eat, only then you can go. So now King Kaushika, sage Vasishta is a respected sage. When he says so much, he didn't want to say no. Therefore, he agreed. And so sage Vasishta had a cow called Shabala. and this cow is a Kamadhenu, and that means it can produce anything that you wish for. So sage Vasishta went to Shabala and he said, I have King Kaushika here with his entire army. Now I want you to prepare a feast that is fit for a king. It should have everything that a king normally would like in a feast, and it should satisfy all the 6 tastes. So everybody is able to be fulfilled. So the Shabala was very happy to be serving the king, and so Shabala produced an amazing feast. It had all the different types of payasam, the sweet rice with jaggery, all types of sweets that you can think of. The food, the rice was like in mountains, and all different types of vegetables that you can think of, all the fried items, every type of the sambar, rasam, whatever you can think of, everything was there. And the entire army was overjoyed. They'd never had a feast like this. Not just that there were so many items, they were all very tasty. And the entire people in that ashram made sure that everybody was served well. And everybody ate to their hearts fill, their stomach was full. The army was overjoyed, and King Kaushika was very impressed by how well the sages ashram treated their entire army. And he thanked sage Vasishta, and he asked him, how were you able to feed so many people? You're in a forest and in this place. How could you manage to produce a feast like this? And then sage Vasishta told him, I have this Kamadhenu. This cow can provide for any number of people. So I have no limits to how many people I can feed. So that's how I was able to make it happen. Hearing that, King Kaushika was really surprised. And first of all, he didn't know there was a cow like this. And secondly, as a king, his immediate thought was, this sage is living in the forest, and at the maximum, he has to feed only 200 people. And he has this amazing cow that can feed how many ever you need. If I had this cow, then I can make sure nobody in my country will go hungry. So I can feed everybody. So this cow will be more useful with the king as opposed to staying with this sage. So he told sage Vasishta, I'll give you 100,000 cows. Why don't you give me Shabala? So that way I can feed my entire subjects, and I'll take care of you as well. But sage Vasishta said, no, 100,000 cows will not be equal to Shabala, so I cannot give it. So then the king thought, oh, maybe I'll give him more. And he said, I'll give you elephants, I'll give you horses, I'll give you chariots, I'll give you 10 million cows, so that way his needs will be met, and then he can still feed all his subjects. And then sage Vasishta said, even if you give me your entire kingdom, I will not part with Shabala. She is dear to me, and she helps me meet all my spiritual work, and she is the source of my spiritual life. Therefore, I will not be able to part with her. Now the king got really upset. He thought the sage was disobeying the king and saying no to him. So the king's pride was piqued, and he told sage Vasishta, see, such a big army is behind me, and I'm trying to be nice to you and asking you to willingly give this cow to me. But if you refuse, I will take the cow by force. And so he ordered his soldiers to go get Shabala. And the soldiers went and pulled Shabala, and Shabala was crying in pain. Seeing this, sage Vasishta got really upset, and he asked him to stop, but they wouldn't stop. And so sage Vasishta did a heavy sigh with a hum, that sound, and that with that one sound, all the people there were reduced to ashes. His entire army, King Kaushika's entire army was reduced to ashes, and only King Kaushika was standing there and Shabala was there. And so the king had to retreat. Suddenly he was without any army. The king's pride was wounded, and the king did not know how this could happen. At that time, one of the devas told him, he has all this power because of the tapas that he has done. That's why you're not able to fight him. So King Kaushika thought, oh, if we did tapas, we'll get more powers to fight him. So he went ahead and did a tapas to Shiva. And after a few years of penance, Shiva appeared, and Shiva asked him what he wants. And so King Kaushika told him, give me every weapon that is known in this universe, whether it is a Asura weapon or a Deva weapon or a Danava weapon or it's a God's weapon. I want every single weapon that is available. So Shiva said, okay, fine, you can have that. And now King Kaushika is really, feels insulted, right? And it's also something that he has never done. He had to retreat from a fight. So now he went again to the ashrama and he started hurling all these weapons at sage Vasishta. And sage Vasishta only had a dandam, a staff, and he was able to effectively block everything. At one point, King Kaushika got really upset with how well he was defending. He was surprised that a sage can manage so much, and so he took his Brahmastra and threw it at sage Vasishta. And now all the devas and even Brahma himself was worried. Brahmastra is like a nuclear weapon, and so he's hurling at it. But sage Vasishta is a Brahma Rishi, so he was able to stop that weapon with his staff, and he was able to absorb it, and sage Vasishta was glowing abnormally. And now King Kaushika is standing there completely transfixed, and sage Vasishta is really upset now. And at that time, Vamadeva comes and takes the King Kaushika away, and he says, I want to save your life. And King Kaushika now is completely perplexed. He has never seen anything like this. And so he asks Vamadeva, how is it that a mere sage who sits and does penance all the time is able to fight like this? I've never seen any king fight a battle like this. How is that possible for him? At that time, Vamadeva says, sage Vasishta is a Brahma Rishi and he has acquired all these powers through his deep penance, and therefore no amount of physical power will be equal to what he can accomplish. At that point, it dawns on King Kaushika that the mystical powers or the power that is gained through the austerities and penance is much greater than anything. So immediately he decides that he also will acquire that power. So he leaves his kingdom to his son and he goes away and does his penance. For 1,000 years, he continues to meditate. At that time, Brahma is pleased with his penance, and Brahma comes and says that I am pleased with your penance, and therefore I declare that you are a Rajarishi. Rajarishi means a royal sage. So he is a king, and now he also qualifies to be a sage because of his penance. So he says, you are a royal sage. And at that time, King Kaushika is not satisfied with that. He wants to become a Brahma Rishi like sage Vasishta, because at that time he wants to prove that he is equal. He has never faced a situation like this in his life where he had to retreat from a battle and be the one who's the loser. So he wants to prove. He says, no, my goal is Brahma Rishi. I've been praying for so long only because I want to become a Brahma Rishi. So Brahma says, then you have to do more penance for this, and he leaves. So now King Kaushika is now sage Kaushika. He is Rajarishi Kaushika. And at that time, he meets Trishanku. Trishanku is a king, and Trishanku was actually, when he was young, he misbehaved a lot. He actually stole a bride from her wedding, and he also killed a cow and ate the cow meat. Because of all of these, he was not really a favorite of his father, and his father banished him from the kingdom. But later on, his father allowed him to become the king. And so Trishanku was a good king, but he had one desire. Because of all the things that happened in his life, he thought the only way he could go to the heaven was if he could go with his physical body. So he had this deep desire to go to the heaven with a physical body. And Trishanku's guru was sage Vasishta. So he went to his guru and said, Guru, please help, do all the rituals so that I can go to the heaven with my physical body. But sage Vasishta told him, no, that is not possible. Only when a person dies, their soul goes to the heaven. Nobody can go to the heaven with their physical body. And Trishanku was not satisfied with it. So he went to sage Vasishta's sons and he said to them to help for going to the heaven with a physical body. Now sage Vasishta's son said, look, if our father has said it is not possible, then we can't go against his words, therefore we cannot help you, please don't expect us to do it. But Trishanku said, hey, I'm your king, I'm ordering you to do this, now you're all a bunch of Brahmins, go get all the things that you need and get this ritual going. And sage Vasishta's sons were really upset with the way he treated, and they got very angry and they cursed him. And they said, you will become a Chandala. Chandala is someone who is in the crematorium and he is burning all the corpses. So immediately Trishanku, from looking like a king, becomes a Chandala with a dark skin, filthy clothes, and nobody is able to recognize him. He goes back to his kingdom and nobody can say that he is the king, so they don't recognize him. So he makes his son Harichandra the king, and he starts going from place to place, somehow making his living. And that's the king. He came across sage Kaushika. And because sage Kaushika was also King Kaushika, he recognizes this Trishanku. And then he asks him, what happened to you? Why are you looking like this? And then Trishanku tells all about what happened. And so, Kaushika is always someone who watches for the welfare of others. He always likes to help. And he was a king, and that was his role primarily. So, now the sage Kaushika tells him, don't worry, I'm going to help you ascend to the heaven with my powers. So, I am giving you my word, I will make this happen. So, then he calls all his sons and asks them to get things ready, all his disciples, and then he also calls other priests who, because they are afraid of the sage Kaushika, they also don't want to, face his anger. So they all come and help, and so this yajna is started to help Trishanku ascend to the heaven with his physical body. And the yajna has proceeded, and when it is time for the devas to come and take their share, only then the yajna is complete and it will give the result that is that they are looking for. None of the devas show up because the devas are all completely against it. As you know, nobody can go to the heaven with their physical body, so the devas don't want to participate in this, so nobody is coming. And sage Kaushika is calling to them, and they all ignored his calls, and which made him really mad. He felt very insulted. He thought, I am a rishi with so much penance, Raj Rishi, and these people are treating me like this. So immediately he decided to use his powers, and he picked the ladle that's used to pour the ghee into the fire. He picked that, and with that he said, Trishanku, ascend to the heaven. And with all his powers behind all that 1,000 years of penance, Trishanku started to ascend to the heaven, and he reached the heaven. And now all the devas are completely upset because this is completely against the nature. So Indra is not happy with this. Indra is the king of the heaven, so he's not happy with it, and so he pushes Trishanku down, and Trishanku starts to fall head down back to the earth. And so Trishanku is now scared. He's falling so fast and he's crying out for help. And King Kaushika, sage Kaushika, is looking up, and with his powers he is able to stop his fall. And so Trishanku is hanging there, head down, in between the heaven and earth. And so sage Kaushika is telling Indra, allow him there in the heaven. And Indra says, no, nobody is allowed with their physical body. I am the king of the heaven. I forbid this from happening, and you can't just decide to change the rules. And sage Kaushika gets really upset. He says, if you won't allow him in the heaven, then I will create a complete universe for him, and I will create his own heaven, and I'll make him the king of that heaven. So that way he can live there how much ever he needs. And saying so, he becomes like a Brahma, and he is creating all the 9 planets parallelly. He is creating 9 planets. He created all the 27 stars. He created a heaven for Trishanku, and he was going to make him the Indra of that particular heaven. At that time, Brahma intervened, and Brahma said, sage Kaushika, this is not okay. You cannot create a parallel universe. So this will not be sustainable. So we have to work within the laws of nature. What I would do is, if you want Trishanku to be in the heaven, let him stay in the heaven that you've created. I will give you the confirmation that as long as this universe exists, Trishanku's heaven will stay there, but he cannot go with a physical body to the heaven of Indra. So then sage Kaushika also accepted that, and therefore Trishanku has his own heaven. And even today, if somebody is trying to do something that is against the nature, Trishanku is an example of someone who tried to do something completely against the nature, and he is hanging midway between the heaven and earth. So, but Trishanku got his own heaven and he stays there. And similarly, there was another king called Ambarisha who did the Ashvamedha Yajna. So, Ashvamedha Yajna is to prove the superiority of that king, but there is no battle. So, the horse will be allowed to wander if the particular king in that particular country does not challenge the horse. Then it means that he accepted the other king as his boss, so as an emperor. So, that's what happens. And so, anyone who does 100 Ashvamedha Yajna can get the role of Indra. They can get the, they can become the Indra itself. So, Indra always watches out for anyone who is doing Ashvamedha Yajna. This king Ambarisha has been successful in a few, so he steals the horse. Now, the priest of King Ambarisha told him, hey, look, now you've lost the horse. If you want this to be successful, the only way you can do is you have to give a human sacrifice. Only then you can do, and that has to be one of your sons. Now, this king is in a fix. He doesn't want the Ashvamedha Yajna to fail, but at the same time, he does not want to sacrifice any of his sons. So, he is wondering what to do, and his guru tells him, hey, the son doesn't have to be one who's born to you. Even if you bought someone, that can be a son and you can sacrifice that person. So, the king is now looking for who can be sacrificed. At that time, he comes across sage Richika. By then, sage Richika has 3 sons. And so, the king asks him to give one son, and they decide to give the middle son. His name is Shunashepa. So, he's been given to the king in exchange for some 1,000 cows. So, Shunashepa is going with the king and he's going to be sacrificed. And when he reaches that place, he sees this sage Kaushika, and he immediately realizes that he is his uncle, because Satyavati is Kaushika's sister. So, Shunashepa is his nephew. And so, he runs to sage Kaushika. He falls at his feet and he tells him who he is, and he says how he feels so sad that his parents were willing to give him in exchange of 100 cows, and they wanted to keep the first son and the last son, but only he was being given away, and now he feels like he has no one to protect him, and next day morning this king is going to sacrifice. So, sage Kaushika calls his sons and says, you know, can one of you go in place of this guy? And they're all very upset. They're saying, what kind of father are you? You want to sacrifice us and for someone whom you don't know. So, sage Kaushika is heavily disappointed and curses them all to become chandalas. And so, he decides what to do. And then he realizes that he has a trick. He wants to teach him a mantra. So, he tells Shunashepa, I'm going to teach you 2 mantras. When you say these 2 mantras, 1, your life will not be harmed. 2, the king will also get what he needs. So, he teaches these 2 mantras, and next day Shunashepa, you know, he's dressed in that red clothes, and he's put the sandalwood paste on him and everything, and the king is ready to do the sacrifice. Shunashepa says this mantra towards Indra, and Indra is pleased with that, and he blesses him with long life. So, Shunashepa won't die. And then he also does another mantra to Varuna, which allows for the yajna to be considered as successful. So, got what he wanted. So, these 2 happened after he became a Rajarishi. And the thing with it is, his help for Trishanku and his help for Shunashepa completely depleted all the powers he had gained through those penance. He had used up everything just to help these 2 people. So, now he realizes that he has to go try again to become the Brahma Rishi. So, he goes to near a river, and then he's doing penance again. Now, with the Trishanku episode, sage Kaushika now has attracted the attention of Indra. Indra is very worried because the sage is coming up with practices that are against the law, right, nature. And so if we allowed him to continue, and if he keeps getting more and more powers, he's worried. He doesn't know what else he will do. So he does not want him to go on the path of becoming a Brahma Rishi. Brahma Rishi is a very powerful position. So he doesn't want that. And therefore, Indra devises a plan to create a disturbance and distract him from this path. And so he calls Menaka, who's one of the beautiful Apsaras, and he says, your job is to go distract this sage so that he can forget everything. He should fall in love with you, and he should be consumed with passion, and he should completely forget becoming a Brahma Rishi. So Menaka comes from the heaven, and she is the most beautiful woman, and the sage Kaushika is on the banks of a river, and he is doing the penance. And Menaka comes to take a dip in that water, take bath in that water, and he finds her in a very enticing position, and at that time his passion is aroused. So sage Kaushika, with one look at Menaka, completely falls for her beauty, and he feels this uncontrollable lust towards her and passion towards her, and so he starts to live with Menaka. And because he's living with Menaka, all his penance is now diluted. He doesn't have the same power as before. Menaka's presence disturbs all of that, and they have a daughter called Shakuntala. And so time passes, and after about 10 years, sage Kaushika realizes how he has been distracted in the path of with Menaka. He loved Menaka dearly, but he realized that she is a bottleneck to him achieving the Brahma Rishi goal. In the meantime, Menaka also had fallen in love with him, and they also had this baby. But then he realizes that it is time for him to pursue his goal. He wakes up from that, and so Menaka leaves this baby in a forest. For a while she was raised by the birds there, and then Kanva Maharishi raised her, and then later on she married Dushyanta and had a son called Bharata. So now after leaving Menaka, sage Kaushika goes to a different river bank, and then there he's doing the penance, and he's doing penance for 1,000 years, and then Brahma is pleased, and Brahma appears, and he says, I'm very pleased with your penance, now you are a rishi. And so again sage Kaushika is very disappointed, because his goal is Brahma Rishi. After all this penance, he became only a Rishi, so he didn't like this. So he said, okay, I'm going to do more penance. And so now already he's become a Rishi also. So he's, Indra is a bit worried as to this person's power is growing. And this time he did more deeper penance, where, he was going without food, and he was just breathing on air, and he was doing severe penance. He was standing on one leg, etc. And so Indra wanted to try again to disturb his penance and stop him from this path. So this time, because he had succeeded once, this time he sent another Apsara. He called Ramba, and he said, go disturb him. And Ramba was very scared, and he said, no, this guy is very prone to anger, so I'm a bit worried. And then Indra said, don't you worry at all. I'll be there with you. I'll make sure this guy falls in love with you, and that you'll be okay. So Indra took the form of a bird, a cuckoo bird, and then he also got Kamadeva, Manmada, and he said, okay, when you go there, we will make sure that he falls in love with you. Kamadeva will put the arrow. So Ramba adorned in such beautiful clothes, and as it is, Ramba is beautiful. She's adorned in all these beautiful clothes, and then she goes to the place where sage Kaushika is meditating. And there is this in a little further from there, in a tree, there is this cuckoo, which is really Indra, and the cuckoo is making this enticing song in the spring. This is springtime, all the flowers are there, is making an enticing song which reaches the sage. And so the sage who was meditating opens the eyes, and then he sees this beautiful woman, and they had Kamadeva ready so that he can fall in love. But before that, quickly the sage realizes that she has come here to disturb his penance. He has already felt this one more time. So this time he did not feel lust for Ramba, rather he became very angry at Ramba. He knew this was a bottleneck to achieving his goal. Therefore, he cursed Ramba to become a rock for 1,000 years, and only when a Brahmin comes with a pure intent, she would be relieved from that. So, he cursed. But then, as soon as he cursed Ramba, all the penance that he had done, the powers had dissipated, because now he did not have control over his anger. So, immediately he realizes that he needs to do more, and so he goes and does a penance for further time. And then at that time, Brahma comes in, and Brahma says, I'm very pleased with your penance. Now I declare you as a Maharishi. So a great sage, not just a Rishi, now a Maharishi. And then again, Kaushika says, my goal is to become a Brahma Rishi. So Maharishi is not enough. So I'm going to do more penance. And now he is completely upped his penance. He's gone without food, and this is called as Aparna, and Parvati did the same thing, right? So she did not eat at all, no food. And then during the summer months, standing in fire and doing the penance. During winter months, standing on snow and ice and doing the penance, not breathing at all, and has completely gone, and this penance is going on for a long time, and the tejas is increasing. And so as the tejas is increasing, the whole universe can feel the heat, and everybody can see the fire in him, and he's glowing like that. And so they're very worried that this is continuing. And so at that time, after a while, Sage Kaushika opens his eyes, and after a long penance, he is deciding to go in and have some food, right, after a long time. And so he prepares all this food and is about to eat. At that time, a Brahmin comes and says, I'm very, very hungry. Can you please give me your food? That Brahmin was none other than Indra. This was one more attempt for him to somehow stop him from his goal. At that time, Sage Kaushika did not even utter a word. In complete silence, he gave all the food that he had prepared to the Brahmin and went back to his penance. At that time, the Brahmin was very impressed. For someone who's gone without food for so long, was not even holding back a little bit, gave everything. At that point, he had reached compassion for another human being, not even thinking about his personal misery or hunger or anything, was able to give away the food. And so that Brahmin said, you have become a friend for all. Therefore, from now on, you will be called ViswaMitra. Vishwam is world, Mitra means friend. So, you're a friend for all, and you're wanting to help everyone. So, you will be called Sage Vishwamitra. And so, Sage Vishwamitra had continued to do the penance, because when he became a Maharishi and he said, his goal was Brahma Rishi, Brahma had told him one thing, that you have to be able to control all your senses. So he was on that goal, and he had completely controlled. And when someone can give away the food when they are hungry, that really signals a level of maturity. After that, he continued to pray, which the heat of his tapas and his tejas was too much for everybody to bear. Now suddenly the water was drying up, the trees were not flowering. So now this is starting to mess with the universe, this one person's power. So at that time, all the devas went to Brahma and said, this person has reached a level that really qualifies to be Brahma Rishi, and if you don't intervene and call him Brahma Rishi now, he'll continue his penance, and that's going to destroy the entire universe, because his power is increasing multifolds. So immediately Brahma appeared, and Brahma told him that he is very pleased with the penance, and so he declared Sage Vishwamitra a Brahma Rishi. And Vishwamitra had finally achieved his goal of becoming one of the revered sages. So Vishwamitra thanked Brahma for that, and then he asked for all the Vedas, the knowledge in the Vedas, to be known to him. So Brahma granted that. So in an instant, he had become a learned Brahmin who knows all the Vedas. And then there was a final thing that he wanted. He wanted for sage Vasishta to declare him as a Brahma Rishi. So Brahma gladly agreed, and Brahma took Vishwamitra and all the other sages, and they all went to sage Vasishta's ashram, where Vasishta had to greet him as a Brahma Rishi. And at that time, if you see throughout this thing, first when he lost the battle to Vasishta, um, King Kaushika had revenge against sage Vasishta. He had considered him as his enemy. And then if you see, his pride was impacted, and so he went and said, okay, I'm going to get the same powers as you, right? And then he had to conquer his lust. When Menaka came, there was passion, uncontrollable lust. He conquered that. And then when Ramba came, he had to control his anger, right? And then when Indra came to ask for the food, he was able to control attachment, or looking out for himself, and at that point he had had compassion towards another person. So when his jealousy or revenge, when his pride, when his lust, when his anger, and when his attachment towards things have all gone, that's when he became a Brahma Rishi. But there was a little bit still there where he wanted to show her, Vasishta, look, now I am equal to you. So when Vishwamitra went there, sage Vasishta blessed him. So generally the thing with all the sages is, if they meet someone who is at a lesser status than them, then they will bless them. If they meet someone who is at the equal status, then they will hug them. So at that instant when sage Vasishta blessed Vishwamitra, he was a little bit taken aback, but immediately he realized that was because he wanted to prove to Vishwamitra, sage Vasishta, that he is his equal now, and he still had that left in him. And the moment that dissipated, he realized, he became aware of it, he saw that sage Vasishta came and hugged him. So with that, Vishwamitra was declared a Brahma Rishi by sage Vasishta, and Vishwamitra had reached that goal. And sage Vishwamitra is one of the revered sages in our entire Vedas. He actually created several portions of the Rig Veda, and Gayatri mantra, which is one of the greatest mantras. There is no mantra beyond Gayatri. That greatest mantra was revealed to sage Vishwamitra. And even today, when every Brahmin gets initiated into their brahmacharya, the learning phase, the Gayatri mantra is the upadesam that the father gives to the son, so they can start it. So Gayatri mantra is one of the most revered mantras, and that was to sage Vishwamitra. So this story shows how someone who was a Kshatriya turned into a Brahmin, because they had the aptitude, the desire to do that, and it was a very hard journey. But this person continued to stay with it and did everything that was needed to become a Brahma Rishi. So this is the story of sage Vishwamitra, who was born as King Kaushika, turning into sage Vishwamitra. And sage Vishwamitra was also the guru of Lord Rama himself. That's all for today. Thank you.